Well, in Japanese culture, really the first reaction I get when I talk about personal branding is, they really think it's a really cool concept, but it's always followed by, well, I can't really brand myself because I'm Japanese, and Japanese just don't know how to stand out or know how to be assertive. And so, I always have to deal with these different kind of misconceptions, or how do I really understand how to brand myself in a country and a culture that really educates people to fit in and not to stand out. How this really plays out is this concept of what is called the inner self and the outer self in Japan. And the outer self is this idea of putting forth this kind of outer appearance or image, which is really based on what society expects you to do, which is very much different from this inner self, which is really your true or genuine identity. Japan may be one of the final places where the shoe has dropped, so to speak, with regard to this idea of lifetime employment. But people are losing their jobs. People in mid-career are understanding that they may not have their job forever, and so they're out there now competing in a global environment that really demands them to essentially take a cultural value and kind of turn it around and be more willing to be more expressive about their inner self, and how can you use that to differentiate themselves from others. But the real interesting thing is that the younger generation in Japan is really grasping onto this more so than ever. Japan's own domestic social media network called Mixi has always been very popular because you don't have to use your real name. And even Twitter has been incredibly successful in Japan because you can still be anonymous and still get your ideas out there. Now, recently, in the last year, I would say, Facebook and LinkedIn have started to be more successful in Japan only because they've done something that they haven't done in any other country, and that is to create user guides in Japanese language, an online user guide that really tells Japanese why, how do you use Facebook, why do you use it for social and business needs, same with LinkedIn. And so what's happening now is that Japanese are beginning to see that Facebook and LinkedIn are incredibly useful tools to really build and build community and build their networks, because it is very much a group and network-based culture anyway. There are lots of tools that Japanese can use in order to look for jobs, and a lot of the recruiters in Japan are struggling with a couple of things, and one of them is this idea that Japanese who have decided to search for, to be educated overseas, for example, they come back to Japan. They're called returnees, actually, and they want to work for a large domestic Japanese company because they want that on their resume. The problem that recruiters are having with this particular type of Japanese employee is that because they're educated overseas, they're now really having a hard time getting hired by Japanese companies. Japanese companies don't know what to do with this new type of employee. They don't really fit the mold of the typical new hire, the typical Japanese who graduates from a Japanese university. And so companies are not sure what to do. So recruiters are calling these folks over spec. In other words, they're too opinionated, they're too assertive, they're too different, so to speak. And it's quite interesting because for me, in the personal branding space, that's like such an awesome thing that people are actually differentiating themselves, but it's causing problems for them to be hired by the domestic Japanese companies, not the foreign subsidiary companies. They actually want people like this, and so that's one of the challenges. I think the other thing is the recruiting companies have a very hard time with the mid-career person who has been educated in Japan. They may be in career transition or they've lost their job, and they've got the expertise, they've got the credentials to get their foot in the door, particularly at global companies. But what happens is when they get there, they simply don't know how to essentially communicate their unique promise of value. I would say, within the next year or so, the next couple of years, I really do see Japanese really gravitating more towards this idea of how do I manage my reputation? How do I do that online? How do I do it offline? And wanting to be able to do it more globally as well. And so it's really an exciting time, I think, for me, and I'm kind of on that cusp, so to speak, I think, of turning it around and shifting shifting the mindset in Japan. And I think that's really one of the things that I say. One of my personal missions is to really to create a cultural shift in the country to really help people to understand that you can still, tap into your personal brand and not give up, the values and the Japanese, kind of the Japaneseness of who you are,